to another one of our Journey Through the Bible overviews. Today we'll be overviewing the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel is one of my favorite Old Testament books. It is to the Old Testament what the book of Revelation is for the New Testament. It contributes really much of our understanding about the future. The book of Daniel discloses to us the big picture of what happens in human history from really the time of the Babylonian exile all the way through till the second coming of Christ to reign at the end of the age. It's through the book of Daniel that God discloses that history is in fact headed somewhere, and that he promises he will fulfill what he has given as promises to the nation Israel. But the book of Daniel, as you'll find, is really kind of an unusual book. While most of Scripture in the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, in the book of Daniel, at least from chapter 2, verse 4, all the way through chapter 7, it's written in Aramaic. It's also unusual because of the number of revelatory dreams and visions that God gives to people in the book. You find visions and dreams all throughout the book of Daniel, some through the king Nebuchadnezzar, some given to Daniel, but it's very revelatory. And because of that, there are a lot of different symbols that can tend to trip you up. I'm encouraged when I go through the book of Daniel that just taking my time and looking at what God has revealed often will explain itself. Now, the way that the book of Daniel is laid out is also very interesting. In the first 6 chapters, they form what is sort of like a chronological narrative. They're mostly stories that involve Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. Those first 6 chapters actually span the entire 70 years of Babylonian exile, spanning that chronologically. However, the visions that are given to Daniel in chapters 7 through 12, if you think about this, it actually fits chronologically into where the first 6 chapters are. For example, Daniel's visions of chapters 7 and 8 actually fall chronologically between the end of chapter 4 and the beginning of chapter 5. And then Daniel's vision in chapter 9 falls chronologically at the end of chapter 5. That was in 539 BC. And then Daniel's vision in chapter 12 occurred 2 years after that. So really, when you get through the first 6 chapters, chronologically, that takes us to the end of the Babylonian captivity. And then all of those visions and dreams, the revelation given in chapter 7 through 12, fits back into that first section. Well, Daniel wrote this book as a Jew for Jews, the Jewish people who were living in exile away from the land that God had promised them. And it was a really discouraging time. They needed to know that their covenant-keeping God was not finished with them. So the book of Daniel provided Israel with hope. It shows that even though they were currently experiencing God's judgment, that he still had a future for his people. It promises that a day is coming when God will deliver his people from the Gentiles and will restore them to himself. So really in the book of Daniel, if you think about it this way, God sort of just pulls back the curtain and he reveals in vivid detail where history is headed. And because of that, Daniel speaks powerfully about what God has done in the past, at least from our perspective, and what we can expect God to do in the future. The book of Daniel shows that the kingdoms of men are all under the sovereign reign of a faithful God. And it promises that one day God will, in fact, bring forth his perfect kingdom, and Jesus, the Messiah King, will reign forever. So the theme of the book of Daniel is simply that the sovereign king over every earthly kingdom will reign forever. And God, as sovereign, as the sovereign king shows up all throughout the book. God's sovereignty is seen in his disclosure of the future. We see repeatedly through chapter 2, and then we'll see again in chapter 7, and then again in chapter 11, that there are 5 kingdoms: Babylon, Medo-Persia, Grecian kingdom, the Roman kingdom, and then God's kingdom. And only a God who can control history is able to disclose accurately where history is headed. God's sovereignty is also seen in how he humbles the proud. He has the power to humble, and he has the power to exalt whomever he will. And you'll see that as you get into chapter 4 with King Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is humbled by God for this purpose, that he would know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he will. But we also see God's sovereignty in the care of his people. The book of Daniel shows that God intervenes in the lives of those who trust in him. So we see that in chapter 3, where Nebuchadnezzar makes this giant image and requires everyone to worship, and yet those who trust God, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refuse and chose to defy the king and lose their lives rather than dishonor the Lord. And God intervened, and they went through the flames without any harm. And in the same way, we see this in chapter 6 with Daniel. Daniel chose to disobey the order from the king, and as a result was thrown into the den of lions. But God intervened and rescued him. Well, as you read through the book of Daniel, I hope that you're going to see that it is actually possible for you as a child of God to impact the godless world in which you live. I hope that you're going to be encouraged with the fact that God is over all that happens, not only in your life now, but also in the future, and that you're a part of that future. So enjoy your journey through the book of Daniel. It's only 12 chapters. And I hope that it's a meaningful excursion for you.